Elie Honig, former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, and our panel for the show is Julia Ainsley, NBC News national security and justice reporter, Joshua Johnson, host of NPR's 1A, and of course an NBC News contributor, and Shane Harris, an intelligence and national security reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome all. Mr. Honig, let me start with you. Explain to me what kind of immunity that Mr. Weisselberg was likely granted. I assume it's something that's limited, but when we hear that he was cooperating on the Michael Cohen aspect of things, what does that mean beyond Michael Cohen's investigation?
So you can see, Chuck, the Southern District is circling now. And you just ran through the things we've already seen this week. We have Michael Cohen pleading guilty to the campaign finance violation and implicating the president. And now we see immunity granted to these two new witnesses. Immunity is never lightly handed out by the Southern District of New York or by any district. What it means is you have a witness that you're interested enough to talk to that typically has invoked the Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination, meaning they have some exposure, at least some exposure. And then the prosecutors have made a determination of, A, this person has important information, and B, we're willing to give them a bit of a break in order to get it. And understand also, it's a lengthy, difficult process. Prosecutors don't like to do it. You have to go through Main Justice down in D.C. You have to then bring it to a judge to get approval. So this is the kind of thing that's pretty thoroughly vetted, and it shows you that there's some real focus here from the Southern District.
Is there any way that Weisselberg would have done this with the president's permission, perhaps, or even acknowledgement, meaning, hey, it's just about Michael Cohen, or is this something that likely rattled the president?
Weisselberg would not need the president's permission. This is just him exercising his own Fifth Amendment right. And once you get immunity, you don't have any choice. So once the Southern District grants immunity to a witness like Weisselberg, you cannot invoke the Fifth Amendment anymore. Your only choice there is testify or go to jail on contempt. So Weisselberg would not need Trump's blessing to do this whatsoever. Maybe personally it would help him if he had it, but he certainly does not need it.
What about the use of this immunity going forward? Is this likely limited immunity just for this case? Right. Or is it something that after it's granted, the Southern District can come back and essentially say, hey, we've given you immunity on this stuff. We need more information.
Yeah, so there's two types of immunity. There's testimonial immunity, meaning your testimony, whether it's in a grand jury or trial, cannot then be used to charge you. And there's use immunity, which means essentially you're given a free pass. But I did go back today, and I refreshed my memory. Essentially, DOJ's policy is once someone has been given either type of immunity, they're not to be charged. And can it be renewed or extended? Absolutely, as needed by the Southern District. So if Weisselberg goes down a certain road and sort of said, I think the extent of my immunity has been reached here, the Southern District can go back and renew or change the focus of the immunity as necessary.
All right, let me bring the panel in here. Julia, in a week of Elie Honig, how contagious does cooperating get? We were talking about how this week alone, when you see all the people talking, you've had experience in mob cases. When do the floodgates open on cooperation?
I laugh because I've never heard it put that way, contagious, but that's a great way to phrase it. Cooperation tends to breed more cooperation. The biggest mob cases that we made, you have to pull that thread. And once you start pulling that thread, you never know how much is going to unravel. You could unravel the whole sweater, but it's almost a logical conclusion. Once one person comes in and says, I committed this crime with A, B, and C, now A, B, and C have pressure on them. If one or two of them break, then it cascades.
While I have you here, I want a legal question about the issue of witness tampering. The more Rudy Giuliani publicly talks about pardons, the more the president talks about how Paul Manafort is, taking it like a man. At what point would you, if you were sitting in the Southern District of New York, or if you were Robert Mueller, and you're about to put Manafort on trial again, and you have this, is that interference? How do you judge that?
The kind of obstruction that we are seeing on a continual and systemic basis from the president and Rudy Giuliani is really way over the top. I think it's important that people understand obstruction of justice.
Are they breaking the law? Could you file charges against the president or Rudy Giuliani?
I think we know what their intent is. I think it's pretty
Right.
clear, but they're doing a good job laying some cover for themselves. For example, I think you're right. I think the president has been quite clearly floating the possibility of a pardon for Paul Manafort. Now, when he was asked and when Sarah Sanders was asked earlier this week, they said it's never come up. And then the next day, Giuliani says, oh, we've been talking about it for weeks.
No, Sarah Sanders clarified it had never come up in the White House.
Okay, maybe
That was her clarification there. I'm just putting that out there. Go ahead.
Maybe they were on the lawn or something. What I think he's trying to do, I think if you could establish that the president was pardoning or promising to pardon Paul Manafort in order to prevent him from cooperating, to remain a stand-up guy, as the president sort of suggested, you would have a strong obstruction of justice case. If you had him on tape, the president saying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pardon Manafort. That's going to keep him quiet. But with his tweets about Manafort, I feel so sorry for him. It's so sad. This is an injustice. What I think the president is doing is laying some groundwork for him to eventually give a pardon, then say, I'm not trying to obstruct justice. I just thought it was unjust.
You know what's funny about this? How should we be reading the Cohen deal? Is because there was a whole other part of this investigation that seems to just have disappeared. We're not getting confirmation that they've dropped it. Is it just sort of hanging over there in case they need it?
So, first of all, I have to say the Southern District, there was a question, how far are they going to go? The Southern District of New York does not pull up until we are done. And they will take this as far as it goes. And wherever the crime takes the Southern District, that is the path they will follow. They don't decide where they want it to end up and then get there. They just follow the facts and the law. Admittedly, I'm a homer. I came from that office, but you can bank on that. One of the big mysteries of the week for me is Michael Cohen pleading not to a cooperation agreement. There was every indication out there. Certainly he and Lanny Davis are desperate for him to cooperate. And a lot of people are trying to figure out why not. It would seem to make sense. And that could be for any number of reasons. It could be the Southern District wasn't interested. It could be that the early PR blitz that Lanny Davis did, that Michael Cohen did, violated an instruction or turned them off. But I think now it's also important to know he still could cooperate. You can cooperate at any point. You can cooperate even after trial, even after sentencing. There's actually a federal rule, Rule 35, that says even once someone's sentenced, you can bring them back and have them resentenced to less. So it's not over, but I found it really surprising that he pled to what we call a straight plea agreement that did not involve cooperation.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.